Many skeptics today dismiss the Holy Bible as a myth or legend, far removed from actual events, but the historical evidence tells a different story. I want to show you why the Bible stands as reliable history. Consider the New Testament first. We possess an embarrassment of riches when it comes to manuscript evidence, thousands upon thousands of Greek copies, plus early translations and quotations. No other ancient document comes close. For comparison, the average classical Greek or Roman author survives maybe 20 copies, often copied 2,500 years, or more after the original. Homer, the best preserved, has under 2,400 manuscripts. The New Testament is roughly 10 times that in Greek alone, with many fragmented copies and dating within decades of the events they record. This is not the stuff of late late developing legends. These accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection were copied and spread rapidly across the Roman Empire while eyewitnesses were still alive. Yet, there are textual variants, differences between manuscripts. Skeptics highlight this, but the vast majority are minor spelling differences, word order, or obvious slips of the pen by scribes. Over 70% are simple spelling variations. No essential Christian doctrine rests on disputed reading. Through careful comparison of all these copies, we can reconstruct the original wording of the extraordinary confidence that we have, far greater than any other work of ancient history. Even beyond the manuscripts, the early church fathers quoted the New Testament so extensively that we could reconstruct nearly the entire text from their writings alone. Multiple independent streams of copying preserve the message with remarkable fidelity. The textual reliability is crucial because the New Testament claims to record and report real events of real time and place under Pontius Pilate in Judea, the named individuals, and with verifiable geography. The same scholarly methods that confirm ancient histories confirm that what we read today is in all essentials what the apostles and their associates wrote in the first century. The Bible does not ask us to check our minds at the door. It submits itself to historical investigation. The evidence from the manuscripts invites us to examine its claims seriously as trustworthy testimony to real events in human history, far beyond being detached mythology. The scriptures are rooted in time and space, preserved through the centuries so that we today can read and encounter the same good news that was transformed in the ancient world. One of the most powerful challenges to view from that is a man who set out to disprove it, Sir William Ramsay, one of the greatest archaeologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. When initially a skeptic, trained in the critical scholarship of his day, he believed that the Book of Acts was a late, unreliable 2nd century document full of mistakes. He traveled to Asia Minor, determined to demonstrate Luke's inaccuracies using the spade of archaeology. What happened instead changed everything. As Ramsay excavated and studied the geography, topography, and political structure of the Roman Empire in the first century, he encountered the fact that after fact, and going again and again, etc., confirming Luke's account. Luke showed precise knowledge of local customs, correct titles for officials, travel routes, and city boundaries that only someone living in that time and place would know about. For example, Luke called the officials in Thessalonica politarchs, a term unknown in other ancient literature at the time. Ramsay discovered inscriptions proving that this was the exact title used there. He found confirmation at the proconsul of Cyprus, the Asiarchs of Ephesus, and the shifting regional boundaries such as Iconium being in Phrygia. During the relevant period, time and region, details that critics called errors were vindicated by the ground itself. After decades of careful investigation, Ramsay completely reversed his position. He declared, quote, Luke is a historian of the first rank. Not merely are his statements of fact trustworthy, he is possessed of the true historic sense. In short, this author should be placed among the very greatest of historians, unquote. Ramsay concluded that the Book of Acts is unsurpassed in its trustworthiness as a historical document because Luke proved so reliable in the parts that we contest, geography, politics, and culture. We have strong reason to trust his record of events he describes, including the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus in the gospel that bears his name. This is not blind faith. This is evidence-based confidence. Archaeology did not prove every miracle, but it did prove that the Bible is rooted in real time, real places, and real people, not myths or pious fiction. The Holy Bible presents itself as history. Scholars like Sir William Ramsay, who examined it rigorously and without initial bias in its favor, found it stands the test. The evidence invites us to take its claims seriously as trustworthy testimony to what God has done in human history. In 1947, a shepherd boy made one of the most greatest archaeological discoveries of all time in the caves near the Dead Sea at Qumran. What he found was silenced many critics and powerfully confirmed that the Holy Bible is rooted in real history. The Dead Sea Scrolls include nearly the entire Old Testament, with manuscripts dating from about 250 BC to 68 AD, over 1,000 years older than previously oldest known Hebrew Bibles. For the first time, we could compare the scriptures that we read today to the copies at the time of Jesus, and even earlier than that. The results were stunning. Scholars found that the texts of the Old Testament have been copied and preserved with remarkable accuracy across more than 1,000 years. The Isaiah Scroll, for example, completed in dating around 125 BC, is word for word almost identical to the Isaiah that we read today, with only minor spelling differences. The same high level of agreement holds across the other biblical books. This discovery shattered the idea that the Old Testament was heavily edited or corrupted over centuries. Instead, it proved the Bible's text was carefully transmitted by scribes who treated it as sacred history, not evolving legend. The scrolls contain copies from just before and during the time of Jesus, as I said previously, showing that the scriptures he quoted were substantially the same as ours. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not merely confirm textual accuracy, they anchor the Bible in real history. They connect us directly to the world of ancient Israel, the prophets and the exile, and the sacred teachings recorded in the Old Testament from the time that they were written. Far from being myths, The scriptures we're told today are the same scriptures known to Jesus and the apostles. The Dead Sea Scrolls stand as powerful physical evidence that the Holy Bible is not religious fiction, but trustworthy testimony in God's actions in real time, real places, and with real people. This discovery invites every honest seeker to be open with the Bible with fresh confidence. What it records really did happen. Dr. John Bergsma, a renowned Old Testament scholar, professor at Franciscan University, and expert of the Dead Sea Scrolls, has carefully examined the historical reliability of the scripture. In his work, including the talk, But Did It Really Happen?, Bergsma demonstrates that the Bible's accounts are supported by strong manuscript evidence, early dating, and consistent historical context. He shows that both the Old and New Testament support real events with historians' attention to detail, not pious fiction written centuries later. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which Bergsma has studied extensively, confirm that the Old Testament text was carefully preserved and matches what we read today, pushing reliable transmission back hundreds of years before Christ. Complementing his scholarly work is the powerful field evidence presented by Joel Kramer of the Expedition Bible. As a biblical archaeologist, Kramer has traveled extensively across the lands of the Bible, filming and excavating at key sites. With his book, Where Did God Came Down? The Archaeological Evidence, he examines multiple locations and shows how the archaeological record repeatedly aligns with the biblical text. Kramer highlights sites tied to the Exodus and conquest, the kingdom of Israel and Judah, the New Testament evidence, layer by layer, the pottery, inscriptions, city destructions, settlements, and patterns match the biblical Bible's timeline and descriptions. Details once dismissed by critics such as specific place names, political structures, or dramatic events like the fall of Jericho are increasingly supported by discoveries. Archaeology does not prove miracles, again, as I stated before, but it confirms that the Bible speaks accurately about real geography, kings, cultures, and historical settings. Together, Dr. John Bergsma's rigorous textual and historical analysis and Joel Kramer's archaeological fieldwork present a compelling case. The Holy Bible is not detached from mythology. It is anchored in real time and space, from the covenants to the kings of the Old Testament to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus in the new scripture presents itself as trustworthy history. Hostile scholar who is against Christianity, Dr. Bart Ehrman, a leading critic of traditional Christianity and the author of books like Misquoting Jesus, writes in this book, Did Jesus Exist? Quote, the reality is whatever else you may think about Jesus, he certainly did exist. That is what this book will set out to demonstrate. Jesus did exist, whether we like it or not. I think the evidence is just so overwhelming that Jesus existed that it is silly to talk about him not existing, unquote. As a historian, Ehrman affirms key evidence about Jesus drawn from early independent sources like the New Testament and beyond. Jesus was a Jewish man from Nazareth, a preacher and a teacher, and baptized by John the Baptist to gather disciples, and was crucified in Jerusalem under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. These are not later inventions, but rooted in first century testimony. Even though Ehrman does not believe Jesus performed miracles or rose from the dead, he insists that the New Testament documents give us reliable access to basic historical outlines of Jesus' life. The Gospels and Paul's letters contain multiple independent sources that originate very close to the events, far too early for wholesale legend to have taken over. This is powerful testimony, even if a hostile scholar like Bart Ehrman concludes that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure whose life is anchored in the pages of the Bible when the Holy Scriptures are not presenting fiction. They are presenting real history that invites us to examine what it means for our lives today. The Bible records real events about a real man who walked the roads of Galilee and died on the Roman cross, and that history has changed the world. One of the strongest proofs that the Holy Bible records real history is found in a single name mentioned in the New Testament, Rufus. In Mark 15:21, we read that the man forced to carry Jesus' cross was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Later in Romans 16:13, the Apostle Paul writes, Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who has been a mother to me too. Think about what this means. These were not vague mythical figures. These were real, identifiable people living in the first century. Simon's sons, Alexander, Rufus, and even their mother were known to the early Christian communities in Jerusalem, Cyrene, and Rome. When Mark wrote the Gospel, likely in 50s or 60s AD, and when Paul wrote Romans around 57 AD, these men were still alive and could be found. People living right there at the time could have easily proven this story false. All they had to do was ask Alexander Rufus, did your father really carry Jesus across on the way to the Golgotha? If it never happened, they could have exposed the account as a lie, yet they didn't. Instead, the early church embraced these writings as trustworthy. Why? Because they were still hundreds of living eyewitnesses who had seen Jesus in the flesh, who had watched him teach, who had seen him crucified, and who encountered him after the resurrection. The first Christians lived there in the very cities where these events occurred. They knew the geography, the officials, and many of the people involved. You don't name specific living individuals tied to central events in your story unless you are telling the truth, especially when your opponents could check your facts immediately. The early enemies of Christianity attacked the message over the resurrection, but they never successfully refuted the basic historical facts. They couldn't because the eyewitnesses were still there. This is why the New Testament was never treated as false history by the people best positioned to know. It was written in a lifetime of eyewitnesses and circulated among people who could verify it. The mention of Simon, Alexander, and Rufus anchors the crucifixion in real time with real people in real places. The Holy Bible does not present legend, it presents history that was open to public scrutiny from the very beginning and stood the test. And the aforementioned proofs show why the books in the Holy Bible weren't corrupted.